Great afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Lunch and Learn with Otrain. 1 p.m. every second Tuesday, we invite you to grab some lunch and learn from our guest speakers. Now, before we get into today's topic and welcome our guest speaker, let's all get a little familiar. The page that you're looking at has us on a big screen, but it also has a question box to the bottom right-hand side. If you could type your name in there, so let us know who's here. And if you have any questions at all during our session, then feel free to type in a question, and when it's appropriate, I'll ask Scott or Shane the question for you. Now, today's topic is all about offshoring and outsourcing, and we have very special guest speaker Scott Linden Jones from Easy Offshoring, who will be sharing his experience and his knowledge with us. Now, my own experience with offshoring and outsourcing is fairly limited, so I'm really excited to learn from Scott today. But I have tested the waters, as have many people out there, business owners out there. So I'm now going to hand it over to Shane to find out a little bit more about his experience with offshoring and outsourcing. He has a little bit more than me. So great afternoon, Shane. How are you?
Great. Good afternoon, Emma. Good afternoon, everybody. And thanks again, Scott, for joining us. So I'm really excited today to have Scott here on our Lunch and Learn. I've known Scott for a number of years, and when I was setting up Otrain, I was fortunate enough to travel to the Philippines in a group with Scott to look at some of the outsourcing operations up there, and in fact we engaged a company to deliver some services, and I know Scott's going to talk a little bit about that later today. So look, I don't want to steal all the thunder. I've got loads of experiences and stories to share, but Scott's the guy here to talk about it. So I guess we're probably best to flick over to Scott just to get us started.
Good afternoon, everyone. Great to be here.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for attending today, Scott, and sharing your knowledge. Would you mind kicking off and telling us a little bit about your history and how you got into Easy Offshore?
Yeah, for sure. My history for most of the last 11 years revolves around IT businesses, and interestingly, I kicked off with doing some work offshore because of a desire for quality. Now, it seems a little bit counterintuitive because a lot of people think that offshore is lower quality, but in IT, I guess I was presented with the option of maintaining a very high level of service and being able to implement some of the latest technologies, and some of those technologies are very labour intensive. Like, for example, being able to monitor the networks of clients' systems and really improve uptime. I know we could do a better job with that with more people. So I was sort of faced with the choice, I guess, about 4 years ago, of whether to lower my standards of how I think IT should be delivered to our clients, or instead to put up our prices, and our prices were going to be put up to a point where I thought they were unsustainable. So I really had to look at other alternatives for ways to increase our amount of manpower and our amount of skilled resources. So that started my search offshore.
Excellent. And so you've been in the IT game, but now you've got Easy Offshoring as well. How did you come about making that transfer? I know you've still got the IT business, but how did that transfer happen?
Yeah, so over the last 4 years then, I set up a team offshore, predominantly in the Philippines, and refined the processes and the systems required to integrate that team fully into my business, and they're full-time offshore staff in a team that's in Manila. And over that period of time, I learned a lot about how that works. I also spoke a lot to other Australian companies and other international companies that were setting up offshore teams and integrating them with their head office teams, I guess, their Australian teams. So that was the foundation of a lot of learning. And then also over the last 2 years, I've been asked by various friends in business just to help them set things up. They saw what I was doing, they saw the successes I was having with it, changed their opinion of the whole concept, and so I ended up just by default doing consulting for people that I knew, helping them set up. So towards the end of last year, the second half of last year, I've done so much research into offshoring and how it was going to impact Australia and indeed how it was changing the way business was done around the world, that I decided to publish a book about it. And that's not specifically targeted at businesses. That's really meant for every Australian to read, because I think it's a topic that impacts everybody. And that was published in January. And around the same time, I realised that there was just such a need for this information, and that so many businesses were going to be adversely affected if they didn't understand how this worked and they didn't understand how to integrate it into their business properly. So at about that time, I also launched Easy Offshore, which was originally purely a one-on-one consultancy, and now it's developed more into a seminar-style approach to be able to reach more people.
So you mentioned before that your book that came out in January wasn't particularly written for business owners, so it appeals to both the general public and business owners. Can you explain who exactly offshoring and outsourcing is for?
Yeah, so the book itself, because I think we're looking at probably a shift of at least 1 million jobs in Australia over the coming 5 or 6 years, at least 1 million white-collar jobs, that's office-based jobs, are going to be leaving Australia, probably never to return. That's a pretty significant impact on the economy.
Scott, can you just talk for a second on why you believe that's going to be the change? You mentioned adversely affected through globalisation. So can you just, I guess, talk to us about that for a second? Tell us why.
Sure. I guess it's most easy to consider in terms of what we already know about what happened in the manufacturing industry. As manufacturing's been impacted by globalisation, clearly the majority of manufacturing now that used to be done in Australia is now done in low-cost offshore hubs, particularly in Asia. What's made that, I guess, expand is the technology that's available to any business these days to be able to, things like this technology that we're using right now, which is essentially free, enabling people to communicate effectively all over the world. Then the education levels and the English levels in some of these labour hubs now mean that the same thing that's happened in manufacturing is actually happening in the offices of businesses all around Australia and all around the world, if you like, Western countries. So the skills which you formerly needed to hire in Australia are now available in many other countries around the world, can be done effectively and are a fraction of the cost.
So that's a huge shift in mindset, not only in numbers, but in skill sets. And there's a lot of what I could understand is uncertainty around that, Scott. What are your thoughts on that exact topic, on the uncertainty and the mindset around so many jobs going offshore?
Yeah, look, it's definitely, on one level it's a concern, and that's really why I wrote the book, because I'm thinking, if I'm a parent who's got children in high school are soon going to have to be choosing where to send their kids to university, would I want to recommend? I mean, IT is traditionally viewed in this country as a fairly safe prospect because of the growth in IT is seemingly never ending, but I'd predict a pretty substantial drop-off in the jobs in IT after seeing what I have seen. So I think every parent needs to have a think about that concept and where their kids are going, and every working Australian, particularly office-based ones, need to consider where their careers are going to be going over the next 10 years and adapt accordingly. So certainly there's those concerns that I think impact at a national level, and each and every working Australian, which there are 11 odd million.
That's actually going to be really interesting, Scott, because I actually met with the chief engineer of Google last week, and he was saying that tech-wise they're doing a big push to push students through high school and into university in the tech area, because they want a certain percentage of GDP to be in that area, and they want more startups in that area. Where do you see that going? Will there be a balance between head office tech firms over here with outsourced overseas support? Is that where you see it going, or do you see it all going overseas?
I think, well, firstly, you need to understand that the range of skills available overseas are as good or better than you can get in Australia. So there's no quality differential. You can get jobs done over there to the same quality. And you might remember a news article that came up a while back about a guy in America who outsourced his own IT programming job he was an employee, and he outsourced that to the company in China, and he was having them do his job for about 10 grand a year while he earned 6 figures, and he was consistently awarded being the highest quality programmer in the organisation for quarter after quarter. So that little story.
Shane, what are your thoughts on that?
Look, I have a moral objection to doing it dishonestly. But in terms of the principle of offshoring, and I guess my view on the topic or the point of the conversation, I think that if we look at manufacturing, and Scott, mentioned manufacturing, and we look at, say, the clothing and textile industry, where the brands and the executive team and maybe marketing, is very much based in Australia, but the actual manufacturing is done offshore. That's kind of where I see this whole thing going, and it is with our business. Most of my executive team at Otrain is based in Australia, whereas our manufacturing is done elsewhere and overseen by our guys. So, in terms of quality, I absolutely agree with Scott. I think, we have zero issues with that. Well, zero in terms of more issues with that than we would, with a local workforce. We obviously have quality issues from time to time, but I don't see them as being any larger. And I certainly see and agree with Scott in that regard.